MTR discusses Anatomy of a Murder, a classic courtroom drama. It stars Jimmy Stewart, other fine actors we'll tell you about. It's a black and white film. It was very controversial when it was first released in 1959. It's well worth another look if you've seen it before, and if you haven't, try it again for the first time. Dick, Anatomy of a Murder, a fine film that we both watched recently, and I think there's a lot of times people should go back and look at great films from a certain era to understand what the norms were in those times. Still great acting, but there's something about this murder movie that is interesting. Why?
Well, one of the reasons why it was interesting, it was a controversial film for that period of time. It was produced in 1959, directed by Otto Preminger, and starred Jimmy Stewart, Ben Gazzara, Lee Remick, Arthur O'Connell, Eve Arden, and a small role, one of his first big screen roles, for George C. Scott. But the film is a jury film, almost entirely in a jury in a trial, which was a rape and consequently a murder committed. And what made it controversial is they used words that had never been used prior to that, and
from a censorship sort of way, the
right,
movie industry
from the Hollywood production code. And Otto Preminger, the director, wanted it to be as accurate as possible.
Because this is based on a novel that existed and was quite popular, so he's making a movie that he's got to be faithful to some degree.
Right, and so words that had never been heard before on the screen, like women's panties, girdles,
Well, just the word rape, even.
Rape, and depicting her as a victim with black and blue marks all over her face and arms and things, that she was badly beaten. It was just very, very controversial. There was one scene in the film where they talked about women's panties. They never used that word before. It was always underwear or undergarments. And there's a scene in there where when the first time the word panties was used in the courtroom, everybody started snickering and laughing. And so the judge said, I know that word is very funny, but you've heard it, you've got it out of your system. You will hear the word throughout the court case. And if I hear a snicker or a little chuckle or anything, the person will be thrown out of court. So get it out of your system.
Fine acting all around. We'll get to that in a minute by the stars, but that judge that you just mentioned was a real judge. They cast a man, I believe his name was Welch, but he was really a federal judge.
He was a federal judge, and he was on one of the circuit courts, and he was the judge that brought down Senator McCarthy during the McCarthy era, and stopped all of that investigation of accusing everybody of being communists. But he's the one that brought him down.
Which, as I read, made him famous, and how then he got, I believe that was his first role as an actor, maybe his only role as an actor.
His only role, actually.
Okay. But that was a very fine casting. That judge, in the scene you just described, was in his entire playing, Joseph Welch, that's his name, I forgot. He did a fantastic job, and I'm sure they coached him well. But who else could have been as realistic? The man certainly knew the law.
Knew the law, and he handled it. And he was such an easygoing, likable character as a judge.
Exactly.
Because he had a couple of other cases early on in the film. But the other part of the film, it was filmed entirely in Thunder Bay, Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
So far up that Jimmy Stewart makes one reference to kicking somebody into Lake Superior. So you're on the very top part of Michigan with that.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Now, folks, there may be some spoiler alerts in here. If you haven't seen Anatomy of a Murder, we might give something away. Sorry about that. You should see it anyway. But go ahead.
It's one of my favorite films. It's on my top 50 list. I truly love it. I've seen it multiple times. There's another scene in there where George C. Scott is the prosecuting attorney, and he's after information, trying to get information from the person he has on the stand as a witness. And he's really going after her, and he thinks that she is having an affair with the person that committed the rape, who was subsequently murdered by Lee Remick's husband, portrayed by Ben Gazzara. And he actually did murder him. And that's why they call it Anatomy of a Murder.
It's a tremendous banter back and forth from the prosecution to the defense because they're in a battle. They're trying to win the battle for their sides. And the acting and the dialogue do seem to me really real.
It felt real to me too, because I that's what I would really picture to be what goes on in a jury trial. This is the only trial film that I can recall that the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney does not do a closing statement in the film. They do that. They mentioned that the closing statement was done, but it was not shown as part of the film.
And who knows, that could have just been a wonderful way they wrote the screenplay to help collapse time, or perhaps it made the most sense because they'd already done the dramatic portions and they wanted the audience to continue to be in the dark. Because I think the audience is led in a couple of possible directions throughout the entire movie, on purpose, obviously, by the filmmakers. Oh, maybe she is lying. Oh, maybe she's telling the truth. Maybe the other guy's lying. Oh, here's this guy with a hidden agenda that's not so hidden. Maybe he's the one that's going to come out and be the bad guy. There are some really good false blind alleys they try to lead you up into.
Right, they try and portray, which Ben Gazzara's wife, played by Lee Remick, is a character who's very flirtatious, wears very provocative-looking clothing, and she's a flirt. She even is coming on 2 or 3 different times in the film to Jimmy Stewart.
Well, again, yeah, that's we're early enough in the movie that we want to wonder whether or not she can be believed.
Right, can she be believed? Was she really raped, or was she enticing this fellow to have sexual advances towards her?
Me watching it for the very first time, I thought the prosecution might win.
Yes.
Yeah. The defense might have a bunch of holes in their case for the variety of reasons the filmmakers lead us to potentially believe.
There's a scene in the very beginning of the film when James Stewart's character decides to take the case. And he asked Ben Gazzara, "Why did you kill him?" And Ben Gazzara said, "I was mad." That won't hold up in court. I want you to think about what it was that motivated you to kill this guy for raping your wife. And when I go back from lunch, I want to hear your answer.
Yep.
You remember that scene?
Oh, I do. And there are interesting, real legalese moments in the movie, just enough to make you realize this could be a docudrama. You know, maybe this was based on a real factual event.
I think it was. There was book by a judge that this film is based on.
Right. It was a lawyer and a judge who did write this very famous novel.
Now, I'm not going to spoil the film, but it's interesting to see how they decide what path they're going to take as defense for why he killed the guy who supposedly raped his wife.
Yeah, and I
don't want to spoil it, but
therein lies some of the cute twists and turns throughout this entire relatively dramatic film with this oddly peppy jazz music basis going on throughout it.
Yes, it was composed, performed by famous jazz musician Duke Ellington.
Oh yes. It's peppy. I mean, for such a stern sort of movie, the music is interestingly counterpoint to that with its jazzy peppiness.
And jazz at that time was very popular in the late 50s.
Oh yeah.
And he also had a short appearance on the screen, playing the piano in a nightclub with his jazz combo on the back.
Yeah. Jimmy Stewart has a moment with Duke Ellington and
playing the piano with him.
So he's like a featured extra with a little tiny, not a cameo per se, but a featured extra. But at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, Duke Ellington was so famous that people definitely recognized who he was.
He was probably one of the.
If you're sitting in the movie theater in 1959, you know, hey, wow, that's Duke.
That's Duke.
Okay.
You would recognize him in everything. Yes.
Some younger kids today might not. But one of the other interesting things, did you tell me in our previous talks that George C. Scott, this was sort of a breakout role for him, that he was better known after this than he was prior to that?
Yeah, this was, I'm not saying he didn't make films prior to that, but this was his first like co-starring role. In fact, when you see the credits, his name is pretty well down the list in terms of
Anatomy
credits.
was nominated for some awards.
And Anatomy, it was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, but I don't believe it won anything.
Yeah, it was a tough year that.
And I think the reason it didn't is because it was so controversial.
Yeah.
It was banned in many cities, including Chicago, of all places.
Banned?
In the theaters. The theaters wouldn't show it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it did good box office for sure. It was a must see if you wanted to go be sort of titillated, I guess, because those were not words nor concepts well in the public discourse among polite company, I would guess. Now, you lived that era. Did you see the movie when it originally came out?
I saw it when it originally came out, and one of the reasons we saw it was because it was so controversial. We wanted to see what it was about.
You heard the buzz and you had to go.
Right.
You made Otto Preminger's point for him.
Right.
And his extra bankroll.
And that was 1959. I was a senior in high school at that time.
Well, fine acting. Jimmy Stewart, again, if you ever find a Jimmy Stewart movie you don't like him in, then somebody tell me, because he nails it every time. But he is doing this good old lawyer routine, simple. He's a typical Jimmy Stewart character, but this is a different. He's not. Let me put it another way. He is playing an amiable, nice, likable guy, and yet he puts on a character here in the name of Paul Beegler is the name of the character he plays, that I think it's worthy of a Jimmy Stewart study, because he's not George Bailey. He's not Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He's not 16 other characters he's played, and yet he's still good old Jimmy Stewart.
Right. He's got a very, very diverse in his roles. He's done many westerns. He's done many thrillers for Hitchcock, like Rear Window, Vertigo, and this was a film that sort of was out of character relative to. He was a stern, very knowledgeable attorney.
But small town still.
But small town, that country boy feel.
Yeah, and he plays that against George C. Scott's big city attorney, prosecuting attorney.
And it's interesting to see how they go head to head in the courtroom as Jerry McGall.
Yeah, the jousting is really what you want to watch. I mean, well acted, well directed, Mr. Preminger. I credit greatly for being faithful to this novel with a great deal of what do you want to call it? Not scandal per se, but they pushed buttons. He wanted to make more box office, and maybe he pushed those buttons on purpose. But banned in Chicago, I didn't know that.
Yes,
indeed. Well, you can see Anatomy of a Murder often on demand if you want to get it on Netflix or Amazon or iTunes or Netflixter, I think, or check it out from your public library. Go buy it from somewhere. I bet you can find it. It's a black and white film. And it runs just over 2 hours. Is that correct?
Just a little over 2 hours, yes.
Mighty fine film. Anything else?
In my estimation, it has an unusual twist ending, of which I won't reveal. And I think the audience, when you see the film, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It just has a twist ending.
And we didn't give.
You'll have to watch it to see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we didn't give enough props to Lee Remick and Ben Gazzara, but they too are well cast in this film. Well, that is The Anatomy of a Murder. Do check it out. Thanks, Dick.
Thanks, George. See you next time.
Okay.